you can see that I have gathered some supplies. We're going to start talking about moving our illustration to the final sheet of paper and working towards making this be a 3-part finished illustration. So you can see that I've got the final final transparent paper here, which is different from the tracing paper, remember? So here's a sheet of the tracing paper, and you can see it's kind of a little bit yellower and it's more wrinkly and more tissue papery. The final paper is the stuff that should be paper clipped together in your kit, and it's smoother and a little bit, it's actually easier to see through, which is why we save it for our final projects. And I'll need 2 pieces of that today for my project. I'm also going to need a sheet of the mixed media paper, so I have that handy. I have a pencil. We'll also need a pen and your transfer paper. So you can see I'm kind of collecting all of these supplies. I am also working to find, oh nice, I brought this with me. Did not realize that I brought my paper from my kit from home. Perfect. These sheets look the same, they're different, they're too small. Okay. So I'm gonna grab 2 of these. So step 1 for this process is that I need to decide before I move anything anywhere which of my illustrations is going to be the top layer and which is going to be the bottom layer. Okay, the bottom, I didn't finish that. Right now, the bottom layer of our illustration is this, the hand contour line drawing. And I can leave my illustration that way. And then it's up to me if I next want the muscles and the tendons. So if I want to have the effect that it gradually goes inside or outside is kind of what I'm thinking of, and then the top would be the bones. Okay, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to do it the opposite way, and I would move my bone layer to the drawing paper, the mixed media paper, so that my bones are the paper that's not transparent. And then I could add the muscles over the top of the bones. And then add the contour line drawing over the top of that. So the finished effect would be that the top layer of my hand, or this top layer of the illustration, would be my contour line drawing, or the outside of my hand. And then when I started to flip them open, I would have the muscles, kind of like I peel off the skin, and then I flip that open, and the final layer is the bones. You get to decide which way you want your illustration to go. All right, it doesn't matter to me if your bones are on the top and we gradually work our way down to the muscles and then your hand, or if the hand is on the top and we gradually work our way down to the bottom layer. That is an artistic choice that you get to make when you begin your illustration. But you do have to think about that now before we start. Hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm going to do, I have my illustrations here, and whichever layer I decide is going to be my bottom layer, I am going to move to my mixed media paper. Okay. Now, if we think back to, so many pieces of paper for this. If I think back to my original like plan for this illustration. I have my little sketch of my page, right, where my intention was to have my hand go through the middle, and I'm going to go with a block of text down here either for the bones or the muscles, and a block of text up here either for the bones or the muscles. I haven't decided which is which, and I have a title up here at the top, and that title will be on each of the layers, okay? If when I made my illustration, it's like not quite positioned on the page exactly the way I want it to be, this is my chance to move it as I move it out here onto my mixed media paper, okay? So if I personally decide I think I want the bones at the bottom, I'm just going to line this up here and just make sure that it looks like everything fits. All of these sheets are the same size. And so if I just line this up, I'm just going to make sure that it looks like, yes, my illustration will be in the right place if I trace it on here with my paper like even Steven like this. If I decide that it needs to be up a little further, or maybe I decide, you know what, I've changed my mind entirely and I want it to go sideways, now is my chance to do that. So you can see if I decide to landscape orient my illustration instead, I end up with more room on both sides for labels. Or I could position my hand one way or the other so that I get one kind of block column for labels. I get to decide right now where I'm putting this on my final paper, and now is my moment to make any last minute adjustments to my final page layout before I begin. So hopefully that makes sense. If I haven't made any changes, if I haven't changed my mind or things haven't ended up a little different than I originally planned, I am, or even if they did end up different, I'm now like making my final decisions about the way I want this to go. So here is my illustration. I personally have decided I'm going to put the bones on my final sheet for this version. Someplace in a file drawer, I have an example of this project done the other way, so I want one done this direction. Like I said, you do not have to do it the way I'm doing it. Do it the way it works for you. I'm going to take a piece of tape and just attach my drawing here so that it doesn't slide while I'm doing this. And this is my tracing paper. I'm going to then put this, remember the transfer paper, underneath my tracing paper. And you can see I can see it through, so I can go ahead and line it up, hopefully to get as much as possible. The transfer paper is a little bit smaller than our actual paper, and most of the time that's not a big deal. So you can see I'm kind of lining it up with the edge of my bones. Now, when I drew my bones, I needed this contour line drawing of my fingers so that I had some place to put the bones. I am not going to move that down to my final paper. I want just a skeleton hand down here for my illustration. So I'm using my pencil. Remember that transfer sheet goes darker side down. And I am very carefully moving my bone drawing out onto my paper. Once I have transferred my drawing, I'm going to go ahead and ink over these lines so that I have an ink drawing. Now, it's up to you if you save the inking all for tomorrow, or if you want to ink a little bit as you go Like that's sort of a personal preference kind of thing. We're going to talk about inking again tomorrow. I want you guys to have a chance. Like I need to finish my muscle and tendon layer. I didn't quite finish that yesterday. Maybe some of you didn't quite finish that yesterday either. But this is, today we're going to start moving everything to the new sheet of paper. I'm going to then, obviously when I shift and move my, when I move this to a piece of translucent paper, I'm not going to need to use the transfer paper. I can just put my transparent paper right on the top. And I'm going to go ahead and trace that illustration as well. It's up to me if I'm going to trace this illustration. I'm putting it onto my final paper. If I'm going to trace it just using a pen, or if I'm going to go ahead and trace it in pencil first and then outline it in pen. That's up to you. I personally think I'm going to go ahead and just very carefully trace it in pen first. Do you guys have any questions about what you need to do today to start us assembling this final illustration? So you can see here, I can very carefully, I'm gonna just hang on to this. The transfer paper, remember, goes darker side down. And so I can see, here's the beginning of my skeleton hand out here on my final sheet of paper. I don't wanna move that just because I know it's a tricky widget to kind of get that lined back up. What questions do you have?
So you did say that all 3 hands could be on the same sheet, right?
Yes, that would be an option for you. Yeah, if your illustrations are all together on the same layer, you're going to transfer everything obviously to that final layer, just making sure you have room for labels, and you're going to be putting your labels on the transparent piece of paper. Yep. Yeah, you had a lot of options for where you were going to put your hands. And yes, if I had an arrangement where all of my hands were together on the same sheet, I'm just going to go ahead and transfer those now from sheet number 1 to the final piece of paper. Yep. Other questions?
Oh, and for the labels and stuff, like, are they just gonna be on that separate sheet of like paper, or do we have?
We're gonna talk labels and adding pen techniques and shading tomorrow. So this is just the beginning of the final process. So we're going to talk about all of that tomorrow. Otherwise, it ends up being too many steps. Other questions?